We have a very unique interviewing process, and we have this intentional culture that the interview process itself is focused on good kindergarten skills. Do you play well with others? Do you share? Do you collaborate? I think women tend to excel in that kind of environment.
Hi everyone, I'm Elizabeth Swan.
And I'm Tracy O'Rourke.
We are from GoLeanSixSigma.com, and you're listening to the Just in Time Cafe podcast, where we bring you fabulous apps, polls, news, books, and people so you can build your problem-solving muscles.
You know, Elizabeth, Ann Arbor is beautiful. The weather was wonderful, but it's good to be back at the cafe since our trip to Michigan.
Not that they didn't have good coffee there.
And good food.
But we missed our private dining room. Let's get to it.
Okay, Elizabeth, so tell us, what's on the menu today?
Tracy, the word menu has me thinking of Zingerman's cheesecake again, but that was last week. This week we've interviewed a different luminary from Ann Arbor, Michigan, Richard Sheridan. If you have never heard of his company, Menlo Innovations, do not miss this interview. He was most recently featured in Toyota Way to Service Excellence by Jeff Leiker and Karen Ross. Menlo Innovations is a super successful software development company that is like no other tech company you've ever heard of. We'll also cover an app that lets you transfer humongous files for free. And then Tracy and I'll tell you some of the highlights of our tour of the famous Menlo Innovations. And for today's printed page, we'll review Richard Sheridan's book, Joy Incorporated, cataloging his journey from despair to inspiration in the software industry. It's all about Menlo today.
Remember to stay tuned for this month's coupon code in order to get a discount on GoLeanSixSigma.com's online training.
Let's get to that appetizer.
There are lots of ways to transfer large files out there. So what makes this one different, Elizabeth?
Good question, Tracy. This month's app is called WeTransfer. It's a free website and mobile app that allows you to transfer large files. What's different is the simplicity. For today, I tried out the free version, and that lets you transfer up to 2 gigabytes of data. There's a $12 a month subscription version that allows you to transfer 20 gigabytes. The free version requires nothing but the email you're sending to and the email you're sending from. That's it. And it alerts you when the file has been sent. And it lets you know when the files have been downloaded by the receiver. And I like that feature. So Tracy, I tested this by sending you a bunch of goofy pictures. I didn't need you to look at them because I knew you were teaching. But if it was something I wanted to talk to you about, I would have known when you downloaded it. It would alert me. And that's a cool feature. You know, that doesn't happen in Dropbox and things like that. I also like the feature that the files are deleted in 7 days. I still have Dropbox folders from like 10 years ago. I have no idea what's in them, and I'm petrified to delete them because I think, what am I doing? Am I destroying somebody's work? I don't even know what this is anymore. So other transfer apps require that you create an account, and they make you go through the paces, and it's cumbersome. So I like the simplicity.
Yes, I am all for simplicity. It's definitely in our bones by now with decades of process improvement work. And since you've talked about the pros, I'll share some things that may be considered cons for this particular application. First of all, it's a public file download link that's generated. It's not private. And if you are a free user, there's no encryption option and no password protection. And free users can't create a WeTransfer account, but it's simple and it's easy to use. And if you don't need these things, then you should use it.
This one came to us from Karen Ross of the Toyota Way to Service Excellence. Thank you, Karen, for recommending this app.
I'm Tracy O'Rourke, and you're listening to the Just in Time Cafe podcast.
Up next, it's Lean Six Sigma in the news. Last month, we told you about our tour of Zingerman's mail order business, and now you get to hear about our tour of Menlo Innovations.
Yes, and this was part of our recent workshop with Jeff Leiker and Karen Ross, co-authors of the recent Toyota Way to Service Excellence. And day 2 included a tour of Menlo Innovations, and the tour was done by CEO and founder Richard Sheridan. So I would tell you right now, what struck me immediately when we got there was that there were some very culture-defining elements that you saw right away. There was visual management use everywhere, making the process and the work transparent and visible. People working side by side in pairs on a computer. Dogs were at work. Babies were at work. People were in slippers and t-shirts, all in one huge room with no walls. So it was noisy. It was clearly different from an ordinary business environment. And guess what? It's working.
That environment was so wild. And I remembered not only every once in a while did Richard reach out to the group and say, or the whole building, the room, it's one big room, say, "Hey, Menlo." And they'd all look around, answer his question, whatever it was. And then at 3:00, one of the programmers stood up and said, "Walkies." And that's an indication for anyone in the building. Richard said not just the programmers or employees there, but also if there's guests there, they're welcome to take a walk around the block. Everyone might get some air, might get a little Energizer, been sitting down too long. And what a nice cultural sort of aspect that was. It was very cool. The other thing was the visuals. They're a very visually managed organization, and everything's out there for you to see. They were so open and so transparent. And one of the things they had on the wall is everybody's position and the related salary. So you could just look and see who's got the highest position, how many people have that position, and you could look on the wall to see whose initials those were and who that was. So they're completely out front with that, which is wild.
Yeah, and even wilder is you get a promotion in pay if your peers think it's a good idea.
Yeah, he said, "I'm not the one awarding promotions. Getting in good with the boss doesn't help you at all because it's your peers who decide whether or not you get promoted." And that was wild.
That was.
Great tour, great experience. They are open to you touring. I highly recommend it for anyone who wants to make a short trip to Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm Elizabeth Swan, and you're listening to the Just in Time Cafe podcast. In a short while, we'll get to hear my interview with Richard Sheridan, the famous CEO and founder of Menlo Innovations, and probably more famous author of Joy Incorporated. But first, it's the printed page.
So, Elizabeth, I'm curious, what did you think of the book that Richard Sheridan wrote after touring the company?
It basically made me appreciate him more, if that's possible. It provides detail beyond what we learned in the tour, but what's striking is his humility as a leader. The book goes more into his history starting out in the software industry. He thought he had hit the jackpot. He had the best career. It was just the beginning of technology and software. And then he realized that being a programmer meant having no life, working alone, working weekends, working nights, and producing buggy products that crashed. So he was miserable, and he thought, this is the end. I thought I was in this great position, started on this great career, and it's over. Lucky for everyone, he decided to change the game. So he describes workplace experiments that he tried out. These all led him to what he has now, which is this big open space we described on our tour, and having everyone program in partners. Right? We saw that in Ann Arbor, Tracy, where not only are you partners sitting side by side, there's only one computer. Only one of you can type at a time. They are truly partnering, which was fascinating. He also elaborated on the role of a leader regarding removing fear from the workplace. Like that's part of your role as leader, removing fear. And I love that. So Tracy, you and I saw tables with work estimates all over it for every project they're doing. They're estimating how long is it going to take to create these different modules, and they do it on one big piece of paper that represents a week, and they try to fill up, okay, how much can we do in a week? And in the book, he goes into what makes it work. And it's all about trust and commitment. So as a CEO, he commits to supporting the programmer's estimates. He trusts them, regardless of whether they're right or not. So consider what we see more commonly in less evolved cultures where people are punished if they don't stay under the budget. So they have an incentive to sandbag the numbers, right? They overestimate. Or people are pressured to be faster and cheaper. So they underestimate. And that drives late deliveries and cost overruns. So neither of these is good for customers, employees, for business as a whole. So Menlo just decided, well, if the estimates are wrong, they're just going to tell the client. So either they underestimated and they agree it's going to take longer and it's going to cost more, or they overestimated and it's not going to take that long and they can move other client work up and do it faster. And that's the end of the story. So since programmers are not penalized for wrong estimates, they take total control of setting and working toward aggressive milestones without any fear of retribution. Clients get products faster as long as they're okay with adjusting if the numbers are occasionally off. He removes fear. It's so simple, so powerful, so rare.
So I have to be honest, and I'm going to tell you that I've seen this book in bookstores, and I've even picked it up and looked at it. And I'm not a skeptic, but when they say Joy Inc., You actually wonder if that's even possible and if it really belongs in business. And it's funny because he opens the book with joy in business sounds ridiculous, and it certainly doesn't sound profitable, but he will tell you why it does belong in business, and he is proof that it's profitable. So I haven't quite finished the book yet, but I believe this is a must read for any software or IT organization, because there are lots of great examples in the book about the innovative changes they've made in software development processes using visual management and other lean tools, from estimating the work with clients, tracking the work, doing the work, communicating the work, and checking the work. In addition, Richard talks about how they've transformed the culture, environment, and dynamics for doing the work. So you must read this book. And if you can, you have to go visit Menlo Innovations if you're in IT or software development. But even if you're not, you should read the book anyways, because it will inspire any leader to find more joy at work.
Absolutely. You can read the full review on our website.
It's time to announce the coupon code.
This code is for 20% off any of our Lean Six Sigma training and certification courses, white belt, yellow belt, green belt, black belt, or lean training.
If you've joined us at the Just in Time Cafe, just use coupon code 20SCONE. That's 20SCONE during checkout. Make sure to use it soon, since the coupon code will expire at the end of July 30th. Coming up next, it's today's special. Elizabeth, give us a little preview of your interview with Richard Sheridan.
Richard describes Menlo's interviewing process, which is fascinating, and he admits resembles speed dating. So definitely tune in for that. He also lets listeners in on the secret to a 50% female workforce when tech companies generally have a miserable track record of diversity. Great interview. Definitely listen up. Hi, and welcome to today's special. We've got a very special guest today, Richard Sheridan, co-founder and CEO of Menlo Innovations and the author of the best-selling book, Joy Incorporated. Richard is a bit of a celebrity in the process excellence community. Welcome, Richard.
Great to be here, Elizabeth. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Richard and Menlo were also featured in the recently released Toyota Way to Process Excellence by Jeff Liker and Karen Ross. And if you have not heard of Richard or Menlo or Joy Incorporated, you're in for a surprise. Richard started Menlo Innovations in 2001 with a mission to end human suffering in the world as it relates to technology by returning joy to one of the most unique endeavors mankind has ever undertaken, the invention of software. And just let that sit with you for a second. That's one of the most inspiring purpose statements I've ever heard. The processes at Menlo are so interesting that 4,000 people a year travel from around the world just to see how they do it. And Richard travels the world speaking about joy, creativity, and human energy in the workplace. And since joy is not what most of us think about, when we think about software programs, one of Richard's main roles is that of storyteller-in-chief. And that's key because there are many stories behind this fascinating and successful workplace. So I was lucky enough to take a tour of Menlo Innovations just last week, which means that I've got some questions for you, Richard.
The questions never end.
No, we keep you busy. So I'm going to dive right in with what stood out for me during the visit, which was the fact that whereas most high-tech companies have workforces that are less than 10% women, at Menlo you've got closer to 50%, and many of them are in top positions. So what aspects of what you call your deliberate culture do you think led to that?
Yeah, it's interesting. We had somebody ask us once, how is it that you have so many women working for Menlo? And I gave what was probably maybe potentially a glib answer or a profound one. I'm not sure which. And I said, well, I think we have a lot of women working for Menlo simply because we have a lot of women working for Menlo. and it was funny because the women here nodded their heads when I said that. And I think we all do this, right? If we go to a workplace and we try to see, is there anybody kind of like me here, right? And so I think that's one element of it. I think the other element is we have a very unique interviewing process, and we have this intentional culture that the interview process itself, which I'd be happy to talk about with you, is focused on good kindergarten skills. Do you play well with others? Do you share? Do you collaborate? I think women tend to excel in that kind of environment. And it's evidenced not only by the mix, but also by the elevation of the women here into leadership positions, which is done by their peers, male and female alike.
That's great. That's the first part I didn't expect, but you're right. You look to see who's there. Does this look like a workplace that I'd fit? And they see that, but I think behind that, as you said, is the hiring process, which is one of the more fascinating processes I've ever seen, because as everyone knows, hiring's a crapshoot. And interviewing, what did you call interviewing? It's a process.
The traditional interview that I used to do is two people lying to each other across the table for a couple of hours.
I think that's so accurate and so sad. And everybody is looking for a way, how do we deal with this? And, internships are kind of a way, but yours is pretty radical. And you offered to describe that. Why don't you give a description for our listeners?
Yeah, so because you've been here, we're in a very unique environment. I shouldn't say unique, it's rare. We work in one big open room, which is, there's more and more of that going on, but a lot of people rail against it, actually. One of the more unique aspects of Menlo is the fact that we work in pairs. So two people, one computer, working on the same task at the same time, sharing their work. It's not come help me with my work. This is our work together. Well, in this wide open and collaborative environment where work is done in pairs and the pairs are switched frequently, they never last more than a week. I think a traditional interview wouldn't work. It would be very hard to discern. I could say, hey, Elizabeth, are you a team player? Do you like people? And all that kind of stuff, because we're really focused on the team here. And you might say, yeah, I love people, and that sort of thing. Well, we don't really know that. We don't know if you would work out in our environment. So what we did was we designed an interview that actually aligns well and matches our culture. So we do a mass interview. We bring 30, 40, 50 people in at a time. We're about to do another one of these soon because we're growing fast. And so they all come in at the same time. They come in around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They'll spend a couple of hours with us. And during those 2 hours, we will pair them 3 times, 20 minutes each in each pairing, with another candidate. And a Menlonian will observe them working together for 20 minutes. So there's no interview. There's no traditional interview. There's no questions we're asking. And the observers don't have access to the resumes of the people they're observing. And so what they're looking for is evidence of good collaboration. Do you play well with others? Now, we give the interview candidates probably the weirdest instruction you will ever hear in an interview. If Elizabeth, you were sitting next to Bill, we'd say your job is to try and get Bill, the person who's competing for the same position you are, try and get him a second interview. Make your partner look good. If he's struggling, help him out. Well, you can imagine brains start twisting in the wind at this instruction because you're sitting there thinking, but wait, I want the second interview. Yep, we get that. And oh, by the way, Bill, your job is to help Elizabeth get a second interview. Make your partner look good. Share the pencil. We give you one piece of paper, one pencil, one task to work on. You actually have to collaborate. That's what we're looking for. And we just watch and see what you do. We do that for 20 minutes and we switch the pairs. Why? Because we switch the pairs frequently in Menlo. So we're literally in these 2 hours that you're here simulating our work environment. It's an audition.
Oh, I remembered you saying you watch the people, and one of the things you were watching for is whether one of the pairs grabbed the pencil from the other.
And we tell them this too. It's not like some secret trick, right? We will literally tell them, if you come in and you're sitting in the room, we'll say, look, here's a negative behavior we're going to watch for. And if you do it, you might not make it through. And my daughter has always been amazed by this, one of my kids. She's like, really, Dad, you want people to succeed in the interview? She said, every interview I've ever been on, it felt like everybody's trying to trip you up, get you to fail, get you to make the mistake that they can disqualify you. And you're actually giving them the instructions on how to succeed. And that is true throughout the course of our entire interview process. This is just the first interview. And the stakes are kind of low. The only stakes at play here is, do you get a second interview? And the way we decide that is after you are all here for 2 hours and we send you all home. So imagine we just interviewed call it 50 people, because that's not an unusual size group for us, in 2 hours. So one of the neat things about our interview process is it's really fast and it's really scalable. Because if we need a lot of people, we'll bring in 50. If we don't need as many, we'll only bring in 30 or 20. It's the same 2 hours regardless, because all we need are more observers, and the observers are Menlonians, the people who work here. And after you all leave, we sit around over pizza and pop over the next 3 hours and go through everybody we saw and talk about them. And we vote. And we vote with our thumbs. And you would have been observed by 3 people on our team, because each time we switch the pairs, we also switch the person who's watching you. Because we want to make sure there's, no bias there either. And so now your 3 observers, the people who watched you, how did Elizabeth do? If we get 3 enthusiastic thumbs up, we don't even talk about you. Automatic buy into the second round. If we get 3 enthusiastic thumbs down, we have to talk about you because you did something really silly and we want to hear it. But usually, there's 1 thumbs up, 1 thumbs down, 1 kind of wiggling in the middle. And then we all talk. And the team asks questions about what the observer saw. And then after 2 or 3 minutes of conversation, we all vote based on what we heard. And then we move on to the next person. And so now imagine this. Again, I'm telling you, this is fast, right? We brought 50 people in. 2 hours, you're here, boom, you're gone. 3 hours later, we have made a decision on second interviews for 50 people. And literally the next morning, we start letting people know by email, did you make it or didn't you? And, you think how many times in our professional careers we've been tortured by slow interviewing processes, right? Ours is really fast. Second interview, you come in, you work for a day here. We got somebody here today, just came in. His name is Colin. He's going to be here for a day. We're going to pay him. He's going to work in the morning with Helen. He's going to work in the afternoon with Michael. 2 Menlonians doing real work on a client project. And again, we will pay him. But now he gets a chance to see, what does it really feel like to work here? I've read about Menlo. I've heard about Menlo. I've visited Menlo. I went through the extreme interview. But I don't know what it really feels like. Now he's going to experience that. And at the end of the day, the 2 people he paired with, plus a few people who took him out to lunch in between, and anybody else he collaborated with along the way, we'll talk about him and say, did Colin make it? Did he do well? Or should we? And the next stage is we invite him in for a 3-week paid trial. And then each week he'll pair with a different person if he made it through into that round. And so he'll have deep experiences with at least 3 Menlonians through that. And we will be giving him strong feedback about where he's not measuring up, and we'll give him indicators of what he needs to do differently to improve. And in this way, we're kind of giving him these strong signals of, hey, you're doing well, but here's some things you need to work on. And if we don't see progress towards the goal, you're not going to make it. So we're pretty clear about that. And we're not expecting perfect Menlonian at the end of 3 weeks. But if there are challenge areas, we do expect to see progress towards the goal.
So this sparks so many things. So one is that it's clear the interview process is the foundation or one of the strong pieces of your culture. Your culture is clear right there, and they're getting a feel for it immediately.
Yep. We start teaching our culture from moment of first contact.
So that is very powerful. The second thing is how tailored it is to what the work is, and this idea that people, if they want to build, a culture of joy, you can't just lift what Menlo does. You have to think about what was behind that. You were trying to mimic what it's like to work there, and then.
Yeah, and there's another great example in your world, company out in Salt Lake City called O.C. Tanner. They are the company that makes, their tradition is making the awards and plaques and trophies that companies hand out to their employees for Employee of the Year or something like that. So it's this really wonderful manufacturing firm out in Salt Lake City, and I've visited them and I've gotten to know their leadership. And they similarly have a very different interview process that is essentially simulating their cultural norms. And again, they don't ask questions; they just they make it an audition. So they'd be a fun other comparator in this kind of conversation.
That's great, because this is what's interesting: is how does this manifest in different cultures? The third thing that popped in my mind is you should start another company and apply these techniques to speed dating.
A lot of people do say it literally looks like speed dating because we have table tents with numbers and all that sort of thing because, when you're trying to move 50 people around, you have to be pretty clear, hey, where are you supposed to go sit next and who are you going to be sitting next to?
Yeah, but what speed dating doesn't have is proctors, observers, evaluators, people telling you this is how you did, this is who you're going to work out with, this is who you're not going to work out with.
I love it.
So coming back, and you just mentioned the leadership in Salt Lake City. What is the role of a leader regarding culture?
There's two things that a leader fundamentally has to do to be a great leader: elevate human energy and pump fear out of the room.
And whatever it takes for you to make those two things happen, how are you going to bring the energy up? How are you going to push the fear out?
And I'll admit, in first sort of 10 years of my managerial journey, I was taught just the opposite. Motivate people with fear. Walk around and say, how's it going? What you working on? Are you coming in this weekend? Roll your eyes at a meeting. Make sure everybody's on their toes, and that sort of thing. And the trouble with that kind of fear is it diminishes human energy. It robs us of the best part of humanity, which is the engine that's in charge of creativity, energy, imagination, invention, innovation, all the things every company on planet Earth is yearning for. But if I keep you in fear, I keep you in reptile brain mode. And if you're in reptile brain mode, you ain't going to create anything. You're just going to survive.
No. You're reminding me of coming into work and seeing a Post-it on my desk that said, "See me."
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah. It's my last day. I should start packing up my stuff. Yeah.
I am going to find out where reptiles can get more work.
That's right, yeah.
So what are some characteristics that describe Menlo's culture?
If you asked anybody here what's the most important thing about joining our team, they're going to say a very simple phrase, and it's, what we're looking for are good kindergarten skills. Now, what's kind of fun about that is at a certain point, years into us saying that, I finally asked the team one day, I said, hey, why don't you guys just for fun, bring in your kindergarten report cards? And they looked at me funny, and a few of the team members were like, well, I'm not sure where mine is. I said, if you don't know where it is, your mother does. Go ask her. And so they brought these kindergarten report cards in. Renee was my favorite because she brought in her sons, she brought in her own, and she brought in her dad's. So I had 3 generations of kindergarten report cards. And the things that we most value are the things that have been the same in, noting the progress of kindergartners for the last 60 or 70 years, and probably much longer than that. Shares, plays well with others, is confident, controls the voice. There's some really good ones that I've seen, like, covers their mouth with a Kleenex when they sneeze. And that thing. It's like, yes, that's actually really important here, because when you work as closely as we do, communicable disease can spread pretty quickly. So you better have good hygiene and that sort of thing. But this idea of, quite frankly, one of the saddest tales, I think, in our education system is when they've done the measurements, they found out we as people have been at our most creative when we were kindergarten. It was this downward trial from there, right? And, it's like the typical thing where they ask, kindergarten class, you go into a kindergarten class, say, how many of you are artists, and like 100% of the kids will raise their hand, right? And in first grade, second grade, third grade, by 5th or 6th grade, 1 or 2 kids are raising their hand. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think after kindergarten is when they start grading you on penmanship, and then things just go downhill from there.
Yeah, or, I really, I'm sure you do as well, value a lot of the wisdom that Deming taught us.
Oh, God, yeah.
And, and it's interesting to me, I didn't know this till kind of after the fact, how much Deming talked about joy.
Yeah, and I did the same thing. I actually did this whole series called The Granddaddies of Quality, which meant I had to do a deep dive on every one of these guys. And I did it by their birthdays. And I can't remember when Deming was born, but, at some point in the year I got to do Deming, and I was looking at his list of what he cared about, what was important. And I was like, wow, he's talking about stuff that we're thinking is new today. Mm-hmm. This, focusing on people and trust and joy. And it's like, no, he was right there and he was right on it.
Yep.
So what is the most surprising aspect of the culture for you?
There's been certain things that we just, I don't know, maybe did naturally or we didn't do naturally. And then one day somebody saw it and told us about it and said, hey, wait a minute, what's up with this? And so there's been these sort of revelations for me of somebody pointing out something that to us was so natural and obvious. It was like pointing out water to fish. And then we realized, oh, yeah, that is different, isn't it? So, kind of a really interesting one was about 7 years in, I was teaching a class, and Cam was his name, was in the class. He asked a question no one had ever asked before in 7 years of teaching this class. He said, who do people report to here? And I kind of looked at him funny, and I'm like literally trying to answer his question. My brain's seizing up. I said, hold on a second, Cam. Let me go get some team members. I want them to answer the question. And so I went and grabbed 5 Menlonians, lined them up in front of the class. I said, Cam, ask me your question. And he said, well, okay, Rich, but, I don't know why you're, laboring through this. It seems like a simple question. And I said, no, ask them. And he asked them. And they had this sort of, finger on their chin looking up at the ceiling response, because there was no appropriate answer for this because we didn't have any reporting relationships. We didn't have any bosses. And we never really thought about it. It wasn't intentional. We just found out we never needed them. And so they said, well, kind of the process. And some said maybe the customers or the end users or maybe the project managers in certain circumstances. And then almost in unison, they crossed their arms and pointed their fingers at each other. And that was like this, just, I don't know, my heart melted when I saw that, because it was such a revelation for all of us, because we realized, oh my gosh, we've created something so special. We don't need bosses. We don't need hierarchy. The team works. And here's this guy who he refused to accept the answer. He says, no, you don't understand. He says, let's say you want to make a hiring decision. Who makes it? And of course, you just heard our interview process. This is the decision of the team. And they said, oh, we do. And he's like, oh, okay, well, what about promotions? And they're like, yeah, we have feedback lunches. It's all done by your peers. So all those women who've been elevated here into positions of paid leadership, I mean, our pay scale is obvious. It's published to the team. They all know it. It's visible to the world, so you can see exactly where everybody falls in our system. And the highest paid people here are women. And so, but that's all done by the team. And he's just, he's like mind blown, right? Because he comes from this really large insurance company, and he's trying to figure out how this could possibly work without devolving into Lord of the Flies style chaos. And it works here. So that was kind of a really interesting moment for me.
That's fascinating. And when you gave that visual of them pointing to each other, I've seen that visual of people pointing to each other is people explaining their culture of blame. When they cross their arms and point to people, it's like I heard one company recently refer to it as their salute. And so what an incredible contrast that is. And then the other piece, because I've been trying, Tracy and I came back, we were describing your culture to our team back at Goleen. And, I said, I tried to describe that egalitarian sense I got, that, your people were promoting each other, that they were each other's bosses. And I described also the openness of the room. And at one point, at several points, you had a question, just like you just described in the class you were teaching. And you just turned around from us and said, hey, Menlo, and asked a question, and people stopped and they answered your question. And they said, oh, yeah, but that's because he's the CEO. And I said, no, because at 3:00, one of the other, somebody who was sitting in a chair at a team got up and said, walkies, and that's the Wallace and Gromit, sort of Wallace saying to the dog, let's go for a walk. And that's anyone that wants to can go for a walk. And I said, clearly that's part of their culture. You can stand up and address the entire room, which is the entire company.
Including visitors, by the way. So.
Oh, yeah. And so visitors can go on the walk too, you mean?
No, visitors can do Hey Menlos.
Oh.
If you walked in our front door and just, it's got to be kind of loud. You know how big we are, and you just said, hey, Menlo. They would all stop, look at you and go, hey, you, because they don't know who you are. And they would just wait, and they would wait for the interaction. So that's our, what we lovingly call high-speed voice technology.
It's the fastest way. Just listening to you and you're reaffirming just the simplicity of a lot of this. I mean, some of this, you describe the hiring process, but what's underneath that, as you're saying, are these kindergarten principles. Or looking back and saying, Deming had this years ago in terms of, joy. And these are not complicated. Don't grab the pencil, play well with others. And people looking for, if you looked when we toured, we saw you had really cool visual boards. You have really nice ways of making everyone aware of what's happening on all the projects. You had the cool game board that the clients came and helped work with. But underneath all that is just these really simple values, and you guys live them. So that's just a nice reflection. It's not complicated.
No, and the other thing is, it's not new. We didn't invent any of this stuff, right? In some ways, our namesake, Menlo Park, New Jersey lab of Thomas Edison goes back 150 years, right? There's nothing new under the sun here. I think we lose our way. We make it more complicated than it needs to be. I'm sure you've seen this in lean circles where, people immediately go to, well, we got to do A4s exactly like Toyota did them or something like that. And if, use the right pencil or something or the right size paper, it's got to be X, Y, or Z. And I'm pretty sure when Toyota started doing A4s, they called it that just because they grabbed a big piece of paper that was happened to be an A4 piece of paper. And then all of a sudden we're like, well, it's A4. You got to have the right size piece of paper. This won't work. And it's just not true.
Yeah, you're right. It's really different for each group, and they developed it the way they did because they did, that what worked for them.
Yep.
It's the underlying principles that matter. It's funny, Jeff Liker was talking about that what was the biggest form of improvement at Toyota was actually quality circles, which I think goes back, 70s, 80s. It's like, it depends. It depends on what works for you, but it's the underlying.
And what problem are you trying to solve today?
This is fascinating. I'm enjoying this immensely, and I want to keep gabbing with you, but I have to respect our podcast. So what are you working on now that you'd like to tell our listeners?
Well, second book is on its way. It'll be published on November 13th of this year. Penguin Random House came back to me and asked for a second book, which was a delight for me because I love writing. And this one will be called Chief Joy Officer: How Great Leaders Elevate Human Energy and Eliminate Fear.
Love it. So how can someone find you or communicate with you?
So Menlo Prez is a common moniker for me, MENLOPREZ. And you can find me there on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not as big an Instagrammer, but you can find me there too. And obviously you can come visit. You can go to our website, www.menloinnovations.com. You can come here, sign up for a tour. We have a week-long class coming up. We do those about 4 times a year. We call it our deep dive. The next one's on June 4th, and it runs for a week. And it's a deep dive into all aspects of Menlo, the culture, our way, as it were, project management, high-tech anthropology, which is our version of go to the Gemba and study the people we intend to serve. So lots of different ways to get to know us. And obviously, my first book, Joy Inc., How We Built a Workplace People Love, is a good dive into many of the topics we explored today, as well as a lot of others.
Great. I didn't even know about the classes. We're going to have to talk to Tracy about this. You have been listening to the Just in Time Cafe podcast. My guest today has been Richard Sheridan of Menlo Innovations, author of Joy Incorporated. If you'd like to understand how you could up the amount of joy in your workplace, I highly recommend reading this book or visiting or going to classes. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with our listeners, Richard.
This was a delightful conversation. Thank you.
Remember to check out Tracy's brand new webinar, 5 Ways to Engage Yellow Belts in Applying Their Skills After Certification. Also, check out this month's Wonder Woman of Quality, the powerhouse and prolific author Karen Martin. Check out the infographic and read our review of her new book, Clarity First, on our website.
And be sure to tune in to our next episode where Elizabeth interviews Gary Peterson of OC Tanner Richard Sheridan connected us to Gary because he was also involved in building an amazing culture with hiring processes as out-of-the-box as Menlo Innovations.
Thanks for joining Tracy and me for another mind-bending visit to the Just in Time Cafe.
See you in 2 weeks.